Chapter 1. The Colors of Memory. The sunset in Mexico City painted the sky in copper hues whilst Lorenzo Velázquez Ruiz remained motionless before his easel, his trembling hands holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. The characteristic aroma of his studio, a mixture of oil paint, turpentine, and aged wood, intensified with the day's waning heat. At 35, the renowned artist had experienced many extraordinary moments before a canvas, but nothing compared to what had just happened. The studio, located in an old building in La Roma, was a spacious area with windows stretching from floor to ceiling, allowing natural light to bathe every corner. The walls were covered with canvases in various states of completion, and dust particles danced in the last rays of sunlight, creating an almost mystical atmosphere. Before him, on an oak easel worn by time, a still wet canvas showed a scene he had never witnessed in his life. A girl in a light blue dress played on a swing beneath a majestic jacaranda tree in full bloom. Purple flowers fell like a delicate rain around the small figure, whilst a Mexican colonial house rose hazily in the background. The technique was impeccable, the colors vibrant, but most unsettling was that Lorenzo couldn't remember deciding to paint that specific scene. Mrs. Carmen Martinez, his 78-year-old neighbor who had come to sit for a traditional portrait, wept inconsolably whilst looking at the painting. Her wrinkled hands trembled as they covered her mouth, and tears rolled freely down her time-furrowed cheeks. "My swing. My tree," she exclaimed between uncontrollable sobs. "Lorenzo, son, how could you paint this? This was the courtyard of my house in Oaxaca, where I spent my childhood. My grandparents' house, the swing my father built, the jacarandas my grandmother loved so much. I hadn't thought about that place in decades. I didn't even remember it existed until seeing your painting." Lorenzo observed his paint-stained hands, feeling a strange and persistent tingling in his fingertips. During the portrait session, whilst Dona Carmen spoke about her recent Alzheimer's diagnosis and her fears about losing her most precious memories, he had felt an inexplicable connection, as if his brushes were extracting something more than mere pigments from his palette. "Dona Carmen, Lorenzo began, setting the coffee cup on a nearby table with shaking hands. "I don't know how to explain it. Whilst painting, whilst you were talking about your childhood, I began seeing these images in my mind. I thought they were just my imagination, artistic inspiration perhaps. But this..." He gestured towards the canvas, unable to find the right words. The elderly woman approached the painting with faltering steps, her wrinkled fingers gently brushing the wet surface of the oil paint. Her eyes, clouded by age but now bright with recognition, scanned every detail of the painting with growing amazement. "The swing was light blue, exactly as you painted it," she whispered, her voice laden with emotion. "My father built it when I turned 6, in 1951. He used leftover paint from renovating the house windows. And look, you even painted the hummingbird nest that was on the lowest branch of the tree. How is this possible? I had completely forgotten that detail, until now." Lorenzo's phone vibrated in his pocket, momentarily breaking the spell of the moment. It was a message from Dr. Clara Fuentes, neurologist at Mexico City's Neurological Research Center. "Lorenzo, I need to see you urgently. It's about your brain scan results. There's something I've never seen before." Lorenzo looked back at the canvas, then at Dona Carmen, who remained absorbed in the image, her eyes bright with tears and recognition. A shiver ran down his spine as an idea began to form in his mind. What if his paintings didn't just capture images, but could extract lost memories? What if somehow he had developed the ability to see and capture memories that others had forgotten? At that moment, the evening sun filtered through the studio windows at a particular angle, illuminating the canvas in a way that seemed to give it a life of its own. The colors shone with supernatural intensity, and for an instant, Lorenzo swore he saw the swing swaying gently in the breeze of a day that had occurred more than 70 years ago. The scent of jacarandas seemed to fill the studio, and the distant sound of children's laughter seemed to echo off the walls. "Dona Carmen," Lorenzo finally said, his voice barely a whisper, as a new notification from Dr. Fuentes lit up his phone. "Would you like us to try to recover more of your memories?" The elderly woman turned to him slowly, a mixture of hope and fear dancing in her tired eyes. "Could you do that, Lorenzo? Could you help me remember everything I'm losing?" Before he could answer, a new message from Dr. Clara Fuentes appeared on his phone. It's about the anomalies we found in your temporal lobe. There's something you need to know, something that might explain the strange experiences you've been having. Lorenzo looked one last time at the canvas, where the girl in the blue dress seemed to smile with a secret known only to her, whilst the jacaranda flowers continued falling in an eternal dance, preserved forever in paint and memory. The sun finally set behind the city buildings, plunging the studio into violet shadows, but the canvas seemed to glow with its own light, like a window open to a past that refused to be forgotten. Lorenzo understood that he was on the brink of something extraordinary, something that would forever change his understanding of art, memory, and the very nature of human consciousness. Chapter 2: Echoes of the Past. Dr. Clara Fuentes' office, located on the 10th floor of the Neurological Research Center, was a minimalist space in shades of gray and white. The walls, devoid of typical medical decoration, were dominated by screens displaying constantly rotating brain images. An antique pendulum clock, inherited from her neurologist grandfather, marked the passage of time with a hypnotic rhythm that seemed to slow the outside world. Lorenzo fidgeted restlessly in the black leather chair, his fingers still stained with paint drumming nervously on his knee. The characteristic antiseptic aroma of hospitals mingled with the persistent smell of oil paint that always accompanied him, creating a strange duality that perfectly reflected his current situation, trapped between the worlds of art and science. Clara, in her immaculate white coat and black-framed glasses, studied the luminous images of Lorenzo's brain on the main screen. Her expression oscillated between professional fascination and barely contained concern. "What we're seeing is completely unusual, Lorenzo," she finally explained, adjusting her glasses with a gesture that Lorenzo had learned to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "In my 15 years of practice, I've never observed anything like this. Your temporal lobe shows activity that defies everything we know about modern neurology. It's as if certain areas related to memory and visual perception were interconnected in a unique, almost impossible way." Lorenzo clutched the folder containing photographs of Dona Carmen's painting, the images of the swing and jacarandas that had triggered everything. "Does this have anything to do with what happened yesterday in my studio? With Dona Carmen's memories?" Clara leaned forward, her eyes gleaming intensely behind her glasses. "Tell me again exactly what you felt whilst painting. Every detail is important." "It was like..." Lorenzo closed his eyes, trying to find the precise words to describe an experience that defied description. "As if I could see through Dona Carmen's eyes. Not just images, but complete sensations. I could hear the creaking of the wooden swing, feel the breeze on my face, smell the sweet aroma of falling jacaranda flowers. It was as if I were there, in that specific moment in 1951, living her memories in real time." He paused, opening his eyes to look at his hands. "And my hands, they moved on their own, as if someone else were guiding the brushes. It was as if Dona Carmen's memories flowed directly through me onto the canvas." At that precise moment, the office door burst open. A man in his 60s, dressed in an impeccable Oxford grey suit and blue silk tie, entered without announcement. His presence immediately filled the room with an almost tangible authority. "Dr. Fuentes, I need to speak with you about..." He stopped abruptly upon seeing Lorenzo, his grey eyes evaluating him with disturbing intensity. "Dr. Montero," Clara stood from her chair, visibly uncomfortable. "I'm in the middle of a consultation." "Is it him?" Montero asked, completely ignoring Clara's protest. His eyes remained fixed on Lorenzo, studying him as if he were a rare specimen under a microscope. "Is he the artist you told me about?" Lorenzo noticed how Clara tensed her jaw. There was something in the way both doctors looked at each other that suggested a complicated history, years of unresolved professional and personal tension. "Fernando, please," Clara warned, her voice firm but with a barely perceptible tremor. "This is confidential. You can't burst into my consultations like this. My wife is in the final stage of Alzheimer's," Montero blurted out, addressing Lorenzo directly, completely ignoring Clara. His voice, previously authoritative, cracked slightly. "I've invested millions in research, consulted the best specialists in the world, from Harvard to Tokyo. If what Dr. Fuentes told me about your gift is true, I need your help." Lucia needs your help. Lorenzo looked at the images of his brain on the screen, the bright areas marking unprecedented activity, then at Clara, who seemed to be fighting an internal battle between her professional ethics and something deeper, more personal. Dr. Montero, Lorenzo began cautiously, choosing each word carefully. I'm barely understanding what's happening to me. I don't know if I can. I'll pay whatever you ask, Montero interrupted, his professional composure crumbling completely. My wife was a neurosurgeon, one of the best in her field. There's crucial knowledge in her mind, innovative techniques that could save lives. We need to recover those memories before it's too late. The doctors say she has weeks, maybe days. Clara physically stepped between them, her small figure radiating surprising authority. Fernando, you can't pressure my patient like this. This requires research, protocols, fully understanding the risks. How much time do you think we have, Clara? Montero's voice broke completely this time, all pretense of professionalism abandoned. The doctors say Lucia has weeks, maybe days. How many lives could be saved with her knowledge? How many families could avoid going through what we're going through? Lorenzo took out his phone and looked at the last photo he had received from Dona Carmen, her holding the portrait of the swing, her eyes bright with recognition, decades of lost memories recovered in a single magical moment. He made a decision that would change the course of many lives, including his own. I can try, he said, surprising both Clara and Montero. But I need to know exactly what I'm getting into. And above all, he looked fixedly at Clara, his eyes conveying the gravity of his words, I need to understand what's happening with my brain. What this gift, or curse, really means. The pendulum clock struck the hour with a deep, resonant sound that seemed to seal the moment. And at that precise instant, Lorenzo felt a sharp pain in his temples and, for a second, saw fragments of images that didn't belong to him. A brightly lit operating theater, gloved hands holding a scalpel with expert precision, a cardiac monitor marking the rhythm of a life in the balance. Chapter 3: The Inner Storm. Lorenzo's studio had been transformed into an improvised neurological laboratory. The easels and canvases had been pushed against the walls to make room for sophisticated medical equipment. Electroencephalogram cables snaked from his head to a state-of-the-art portable monitor, whilst Clara meticulously adjusted the electrodes with expert but trembling hands. The air smelled of a strange mixture of hospital antiseptic and oils, as if science and art were waging a silent battle for dominion of the space. In a worn leather armchair, Mrs. Lucia Montero sat with the characteristic vacant stare of advanced Alzheimer's patients. Her perfectly styled silver hair and elegant navy blue dress painfully contrasted with the emptiness in her eyes. Dr. Montero remained by her side, holding her hand with a tenderness that revealed decades of love and devotion. Are you completely sure about this? Clara whispered, checking the electrode connections one last time. Her voice betrayed a concern that went beyond professional. The activity in your brain during the last session with Dona Carmen was worrying. The patterns we observed. Lorenzo nodded whilst preparing his brushes with deliberately slow movements, each one chosen with the care of a surgeon selecting his instruments. If I can help recover that surgical procedure, if there's the slightest possibility, you could save hundreds of lives, Dr. Montero completed, without taking his eyes off his wife. His eyes shone with a mixture of hope and desperation. Lucia was brilliant. Her technique could revolutionize the treatment of brain tumors considered inoperable. But she never managed to document it completely before the illness. Lorenzo dipped the brush in white paint, observing the empty canvas that rose before him like a portal waiting to be opened. The headache that had begun as a mild annoyance that morning now pulsed with more intensity, like a tribal drum announcing an imminent storm. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Clara activated the monitor, her eyes alternating between the readings and Lorenzo's tense face. At the first brushstroke, Lorenzo felt the now familiar tug on his consciousness, as if something inside his mind detached and floated free. But this time was different. The images didn't arrive as a gentle flow of memories, but as a devastating avalanche. Brightly lit operating theaters, anxious faces of patients, complex medical procedures executed with millimetric precision. His hand moved frantically across the canvas, capturing technical details with a precision that defied all logic. His brain waves are spiking. Clara exclaimed, alarmed by the monitor readings. Lorenzo, we need to stop. No, he growled, unable to stop his hand's movement. The brush danced across the canvas as if possessed by its own will. Almost got it. On the canvas, a surgical scene came to life with impossible photographic detail. Lucia's hands, young and sure, making a precise incision. The new method she had developed, each step executed with a precision that could revolutionize modern neurosurgery. Suddenly, Lucia Montero sat up straight in her chair, her back straight as an arrow. The trigeminal nerve, she exclaimed with a clarity that nobody had heard in months. Her eyes, previously clouded by illness, shone with the sharp intelligence that had characterized her during her career. The trigeminal nerve must be preserved. The key is in the angle of approach. Dr. Montero ran to his wife, tears rolling down his cheeks. Lucy, do you recognize me? It's Fernando. But something was terribly wrong. Lorenzo felt as if his brain were on fire. The images were no longer just of medical procedures. He saw intimate moments from Lucia's life, her medical school graduation, her wedding to Fernando, the birth of their children, her deepest fears, her most secret hopes. Everything flowed through him like an overflowing river. His blood pressure is rising dangerously. Clara shouted, her fingers flying over the medical equipment. Lorenzo, you have to stop now. Lorenzo wanted to stop, but his hand kept painting compulsively, as if possessed by a force greater than his will. Blood began dripping from his nose, staining the canvas with crimson drops that mixed with the paint in a macabre ballet of colors. Fernando, help me disconnect him. Clara's shout seemed to come from very far away, as if through an endless tunnel. Lorenzo's last coherent thought was seeing Lucia Montero looking directly into his eyes, with terrifying lucidity. In that gaze was recognition, understanding, and something else. Warning? Then everything went black. He woke up 3 days later in a hospital room. The smell of disinfectant and the rhythmic beeping of monitors were the first things his consciousness registered. Clara was at his side, reviewing his medical history with eyes reddened from lack of sleep. What happened? Lorenzo asked, his throat dry as sandpaper. You suffered a minor stroke, Clara responded, her voice tense with worry and exhaustion. Lorenzo, your brain isn't designed to handle so many foreign memories. It's as if you were overloading your neural circuits. Lucia. The question came out as a fearful whisper. She regained lucidity for several hours. She was able to document her surgical procedure. Clara paused, her eyes filling with tears. But then she fell into a coma. She passed away this morning. Lorenzo closed his eyes, tears rolling freely down his cheeks. I killed her. No, Clara took his hand firmly. But there's something else you need to know. During your unconsciousness, you've been talking. In different voices. Telling memories that aren't yours. And Lorenzo. Her voice trembled. The voices, some are from people you've never met. At that moment, Lorenzo realized that the images were still there, playing in his mind like an endless film. Memories from Lucia, from Dona Carmen, and from other people he didn't know. Voices, faces, entire lives swirling in his consciousness like leaves caught in a whirlwind. Clara, he whispered, the terror evident in his voice, I think the memories, they don't go away when I finish painting them. They stay with me. And there's more, there are memories I haven't painted, from people I've never met. It's as if I'd opened a door that I don't know how to close. Chapter 4, Echoes of Silence. The Neurological Research Center, a modern building with glass walls reflecting Mexico City's skyline, had allocated an entire wing to Project Memory. This space, once dedicated to neurodegenerative disease research, now housed a phenomenon that defied scientific understanding, Lorenzo Velázquez Ruiz and his ability to extract and preserve memories through art. The white walls of the wing were covered with paintings, extracted memories documenting entire lives, each captured with a precision and vivacity that defied logic. Lorenzo, still recovering from his recent episode, observed his reflection in the window whilst Clara prepared the next testing session. His eyes, once full of the confidence of an artist sure of his talent, now reflected a mixture of fascination and fear. The results are fascinating, Clara commented, reviewing a tablet loaded with neurological data. Your brain has developed new neural connections. It's as if it had created a completely new storage system, a kind of living archive. Lorenzo barely heard her. In his mind, the voices never quietened. Fragments of others' lives mixed with his own memories, creating a chaotic and uncontrollable mosaic. My first kiss was in 1952. The smell of freshly baked bread in my father's bakery. The war, the bombings. The cacophony of voices was constant, an endless river of memories flowing through his consciousness, each demanding attention, each resisting being forgotten. Lorenzo, are you here with me? Clara snapped her fingers in front of his face, pulling him from his trance. Sorry, he mumbled, rubbing his temples in a futile attempt to calm the persistent pain throbbing in his head. Each day it's harder to distinguish which memories are mine. A knock at the door interrupted the conversation. It was Maria, a nurse from the geriatric ward, in her immaculate uniform and with an expression of professional concern. Dr. Fuentes, the new patient has arrived. A young woman entered pushing a wheelchair. In it, a frail-looking elderly woman stared into space. I'm Ana Garcia, the young woman introduced herself, with a voice that denoted both hope and desperation. This is my mother, Rosa. The doctors say she has only weeks left. Lorenzo felt the familiar tingling in his fingers, a sensation he now associated with the beginning of a connection. Unable to help it, his mind began to catch glimpses of memories, a garden full of red roses, the sound of an old sewing machine, children's laughter echoing in a sunny courtyard. No, he said firmly, stepping back. I can't do it. Not after what happened with Dr. Montero. Lorenzo, Clara intervened, approaching him with a pleading expression in her eyes. We've modified the protocol. This time we'll have more control, more safety measures. Control? Lorenzo laughed bitterly, a sound that resonated in the room with an echo of desperation. How can you control this? He pointed to the paintings on the walls, each one a testament to past lives. Each of these memories lives inside me now. I feel everyone's pain, their joys, their fears. I'm losing myself. Anna knelt beside her mother's chair, her eyes filled with tears. Please, she begged, her voice breaking with emotion. We just want one last conversation with her. A chance to say goodbye. Lorenzo looked at Rosa. For a moment, he thought he saw a flash of recognition in her empty eyes. And then, without warning, an avalanche of images hit him. Rosa, young and beautiful, sewing Anna's wedding dress. Rosa, crying in secret whilst packing away her deceased husband's things. Rosa, storing a letter in an ancient box, a letter she never delivered. There's a letter, Lorenzo said involuntarily, the words coming out before he could stop them. In a carved wooden box, behind your dressing table mirror. Anna turned pale, her eyes widening in surprise. How do you know? Your mother never told you that your father wrote that letter before he died, Lorenzo continued, unable to stop the flow of information. She never showed it to you because... Stop, shouted Clara, holding Lorenzo as he staggered, his legs giving way under the weight of memories. Your nose is bleeding again. But it was too late. Rosa's memories were already intertwined with the others in his mind, like threads in an infinite tapestry. And with them came a terrifying revelation. He wasn't just seeing memories, he was absorbing entire souls. Elena, whispered Lorenzo, his voice trembling, I think I know why Dr. Montero died after our session. I didn't just take her memories. I took part of her vital essence. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of a vital signs monitor that began to beep somewhere in the corridor. Rosa had closed her eyes and was breathing weakly. What have I done? Lorenzo mumbled, as the voices in his head grew in intensity, threatening to drown his own consciousness in a sea of foreign memories. Chapter 5. The Price of Memories. The rain beat relentlessly against the laboratory windows, creating a hypnotic rhythm that mingled with the hum of medical equipment. Lorenzo remained motionless in front of the high-definition screen displaying his most recent brain scans. The bright areas indicating neuronal activity had grown alarmingly, spreading like a luminous spider's web that seemed to take on a life of its own with each new scan. It's as if your brain were creating a living archive, Clara explained, pointing at the images with a laser that drew red circles over the most active areas. Her eyes, framed by deep dark circles, revealed entire nights dedicated to studying this unprecedented phenomenon. Each new memory you absorb expands this neural network in a way that defies everything we know about brain plasticity. Lorenzo touched the screen with trembling fingers, tracing the patterns he now recognized as the fingerprints of stored memories. And Rosa? Stable, but... Clara hesitated, biting her lower lip whilst searching for the right words. Her brain activity has decreased significantly since your involuntary connection. It's as if part of her essence had transferred to you. The weight of guilt settled in Lorenzo's chest like a lead slab. Since the incident, he had begun to experience something new and disturbing. He could feel Rosa's presence, like a weak but persistent echo in his consciousness, along with all the other voices that now inhabited his mind. "I need to paint them," he mumbled, more to himself than to Clara. His fingers moved involuntarily, as if holding an invisible brush. The memories, they screamed to get out. It's as if they had a life of their own, as if they demanded to be freed. "Lorenzo, no. Your last episode almost." Clara stopped when she saw he was already in motion, installing a new canvas on the easel with frantic movements. His hands trembled whilst mixing the colors on the palette, but it wasn't from fear or weakness. It was anticipation. Need. Addiction. The act of painting had become more than art. It was a compulsion, a way to release the pressure that accumulated in his mind with each new absorbed memory. "At least let me connect you to the monitoring equipment," Clara pleaded, already resigned that she couldn't stop him. Lorenzo nodded distractedly, allowing her to place the electrodes on his head with the efficiency that comes from practice. The brush touched the canvas and the outside world vanished like fog under the morning sun. This time, the images flowed like an overflowing river after a tropical storm. They weren't just Rosa's or Dr. Montero's memories. They were memories of people he had never met: a soldier dying in a trench during a forgotten war, a ballerina performing her last recital before arthritis claimed her joints, a lost child in an amusement park who would never return home. "Lorenzo, your vital signs are collapsing." Clara's voice sounded distant, as if coming from the bottom of a deep well. But he couldn't stop. His hands moved frantically across the canvas, creating an impossible composition. Dozens of interwoven scenes, complete lives converging in a single moment. It was beautiful and terrible at once, like watching an accident you can't look away from. "I can see them all," he whispered, his voice altered by the multiple consciousnesses flowing through him. "They're not just memories, they're souls. Lost souls seeking an anchor in the material world." Suddenly, a new presence manifested in his mind. It was different from all the others, older, more powerful. A voice that spoke in a language he didn't know but somehow perfectly understood. Memory bearer, it resonated in his head with the force of distant thunder. "At last we meet." Lorenzo felt his heart stop for a second. "Who? We are the guardians. Those who came before. Those who, like you, carry the weight of lost memories." The brush stopped mid-stroke, drops of paint falling to the floor like colored tears. "Are there others like me?" There were. And they all paid the price. "As you will." Clara was shouting something about an imminent cardiac arrest, but Lorenzo barely heard her. The images kept coming, faster, more intense, like an unstoppable cascade of consciousnesses seeking expression. "Each memory you absorb brings you closer to us," continued the ancient voice. "Each soul you touch consumes a bit more of your own essence. It is the price of the gift, the necessary sacrifice to preserve the stories that the world needs to remember." "How do I stop it?" Lorenzo pleaded, feeling his consciousness fragmenting into 1,000 pieces, each containing a fragment of a different life. "You can't. It is your gift. Your curse. Your destiny." The cardiac monitor emitted an alarming beep that resonated throughout the room. Lorenzo felt his legs giving way beneath him. The brush fell from his hands, leaving a crimson stain on the floor that mixed with the blood dripping from his nose, creating a pattern that seemed to tell its own story. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was his painting, a kaleidoscope of interwoven lives, and in the center, barely visible, his own face, fading among others' memories like a photograph exposed too long to light. "We won't lose him." Clara's desperate cry seemed to come from very far away. "I need an emergency team here, now." But inside Lorenzo's mind, the Guardian's voices whispered an inescapable truth. He was no longer just Lorenzo Velázquez Ruiz. He had become a vessel for lost souls, and each new memory dragged him deeper into an abyss from which he might never return. Chapter 6: The Threshold. The hospital room remained in twilight, illuminated only by the greenish glow of medical monitors and the dim light filtering through partially closed blinds. Lorenzo had been in a coma for 3 days, but his mind was more active than ever. In the limbo between consciousness and unconsciousness, he navigated an infinite ocean of memories that intertwined like ocean currents in an eternal dance of recollections. Clara hadn't left his side for 72 exhausting hours, studying the brain readings with a mixture of professional fascination and deep personal concern. The patterns of neuronal activity she observed on the screens were like nothing she had seen before in her career, constellations of memories dancing in perfect synchrony, creating maps of consciousness that defied all scientific understanding. "His mind is reorganizing itself," she mumbled to herself, adjusting the electrodes with fingers trembling from excess coffee and lack of sleep. The dark circles under her eyes revealed the weight of her constant vigil. At that moment, Ana Garcia entered the room silently. The sound of her heels on the linoleum floor created a rhythm that mingled with the regular beeping of cardiac monitors. "How is he?" "Physically stable, but..." Clara pointed to the monitors with a tired gesture. "It's as if his brain were creating new connections, new structures. And look at this." She showed a video on her tablet. The walls of Lorenzo's room were covered with drawings made with marker, created during his sleepwalking episodes in recent nights. Are those the memories he absorbed?" Anna approached the walls, studying the intricate patterns that seemed to come alive under the fluorescent light. "Not just that," Clara responded, running her fingers over one of the drawings. "I think he's mapping the connections between them. As if he were building a physical neural network of shared memories. It's as if his brain were creating a new language to process and store all these consciousnesses." Inside his mind, Lorenzo floated in an infinite space, a luminous void where time and space lost all meaning. The Guardian's voices surrounded him, their words interweaving in a symphony of ancestral knowledge that resonated through the eons. Every Guardian before you reached this point, the voices resonated, like a chorus of ancient sages. The threshold between being a vessel and becoming something more. The moment of choice. Lorenzo saw images of others like him throughout history, shamans in prehistoric caves painting tribal memories, medieval mystics transcribing visions in illuminated manuscripts, tortured artists channeling the voices of the dead in their works, all connected by the same gift, the same curse. But the price. The voices turned somber, laden with the weight of countless sacrifices. The price is your own identity. In the outside world, the monitors began emitting alerts with growing urgency. Lorenzo's body convulsed gently while his eyes moved frantically under his eyelids, as if following invisible images in a film only he could see. "He's going into fibrillation," Clara shouted, preparing the defibrillator with precise movements born from years of medical practice. But inside his mind, Lorenzo had reached a transcendental revelation. He saw the pattern, the infinite network of connections between all the souls he had touched. And in the center, like a bright node of pure consciousness, was himself, transforming into something humanity had never seen before. "You must choose," said the Guardians, their voices resonating with the gravity of the moment. "You can return, abandon your gift, live a normal life, or you can cross the threshold and become one of us. Be the guardian of lost memories." "And what will happen to all these souls?" asked Lorenzo, his mental voice resonating in the luminous void. "To all these memories I've collected. They will be lost. As they have been lost so many times before. It is the natural cycle of things, the price of forgetting." At that moment, Lorenzo felt the presence of every person whose memories he had absorbed: Rosa, Dr. Montero, Dona Carmen, and hundreds more. They weren't just memories, they were entire lives, stories that deserved to be preserved, voices that refused to be silenced. "No," he said firmly, his mental voice acquiring new authority. "There must be another way. A path that allows us to preserve without destroying, remember without losing. The guardians remained silent for a moment that seemed to stretch to infinity. There is one, but no one has survived the attempt. In the hospital room, Clara was preparing the defibrillator paddles when she noticed something extraordinary. The drawings on the walls began to glow with a faint light, pulsing to the rhythm of Lorenzo's brain waves. "Anna," she whispered, her voice trembling with amazement, "look at this." The lines moved, connected, formed new patterns that defied comprehension. And in the center of it all, the monitor showed an unprecedented spike in brain activity in medical history. Lorenzo had made his decision. He wouldn't be just a vessel for memories, nor would he lose himself in the collective of guardians. He would find a way to preserve these stories without sacrificing his own essence, to be the bridge between the lost and the present. "Show me," he challenged the guardians, his mental voice resonating with unshakable determination. "Show me how I can be the bridge." The hospital room lit up with a blinding glow that seemed to emanate from Lorenzo himself, and the continuous beep of the cardiac monitor mixed with Clara's desperate cry. "We're losing him." Chapter 7. The Bridge Between Worlds. The light emanating from Lorenzo's body flooded the hospital room with an opalescent glow, as if dawn had decided to be born within those four walls. Clara and Anna instinctively stepped back, dazzled by the intensity of the phenomenon, while the drawings on the walls came to life, moving as if they were liquid projections of memories refusing to remain static. In the vast mental space where Lorenzo floated, beyond the limits of ordinary consciousness, the guardians manifested their presence as intertwined columns of light, each pulsing with the energy of countless lives and memories preserved through the eons. The bridge requires an anchor. Their voices resonated in a cosmic symphony that reverberated through the dimensions of thought. A point of connection between the physical world and the plane of memories. No guardian has managed to maintain that balance without losing themselves in the process. Lorenzo felt his consciousness expanding beyond the limits of his being, touching every memory, every life he had absorbed. They were no longer chaotic voices competing for attention. Now he could see the pattern, the underlying structure that connected all stories in a cosmic tapestry of human experience. "You're not trying to preserve memories," he suddenly realized, the epiphany illuminating his mind like lightning in the darkest night. "You're trying to keep them alive, to allow them to evolve and grow beyond their origins." In the hospital, Clara watched in astonishment as Lorenzo's vital signs fluctuated in impossible patterns, defying everything medical science considered possible. His brain activity showed multiple foci of simultaneous activity, as if different parts of his mind were operating independently, each processing and reinterpreting fragments of the lives he had absorbed. "Dr. Fuentes." Anna pointed at the walls with a mixture of terror and amazement. The drawings had transformed into moving scenes. Dr. Montero performing her revolutionary surgery with superhuman precision, Rosa sewing Anna's wedding dress while tears of joy rolled down her cheeks, hundreds of interwoven moments narrating the history of humanity in a living fresco. Lorenzo began to understand the true nature of his gift. He didn't need to contain memories like a passive vessel, he needed to channel them, transform them. Just as an artist doesn't retain paint, but uses it to create something new and transcendent, he could be the medium through which these stories found new life and meaning. "My gift is not to absorb," he declared to the guardians, his mental voice resonating with a clarity and conviction that surprised even the ancient entities. "It is to translate, to transform, to create bridges between the lost and the present, between the forgotten and what is yet to come." His hands began to move in the air, as if he were painting in the void of space-time. Each gesture created waves of energy that reorganized the chaos of memories in his mind, weaving a new reality where past, present and future intertwined in an eternal dance of meaning and purpose. "The transformation has begun," announced the guardians, their voices mixing wonder and warning. "But the price remains high. Each bridge requires a sacrifice, each connection demands a part of you." Lorenzo's physical body arched on the hospital bed, defying gravity for a moment that seemed to stretch to infinity. Blood began to flow from his nose, his ears, his eyes, but instead of falling, it floated in the air, forming patterns similar to the drawings on the walls. Each drop was like a pixel in a larger image that was forming, a new visual language that translated human experience into something tangible and universal. Clara was preparing to intervene, years of medical training fighting against the amazement that paralyzed her body, when Anna stopped her with a trembling hand. "Look," exclaimed the young woman, pointing at the supernatural phenomenon unfolding before their eyes. The blood didn't fall, it danced in the air, forming constellations of memories that intertwined with the drawings on the walls. Each drop seemed to contain entire worlds, complete lives seeking expression and recognition. In his mind, Lorenzo faced the crucial moment of his transformation. He could feel his original identity dissolving, the boundaries of his being expanding to encompass all the lives he had touched. But instead of resisting, he used that dissolution as the last and most powerful pigment in his cosmic palette. "I am not just Lorenzo," he declared, his voice resonating across the dimensions of being. "I am the canvas and the painter, the bridge and the walker, the memory and the guardian. I am the point where all stories converge and from where they can be reborn." A pulse of energy traversed the hospital room, causing the monitors to burst in a shower of sparks that danced in the air like metallic fireflies. For a moment that seemed to contain eternities, everything was plunged into absolute darkness and a silence that seemed to absorb even thoughts. When the light returned, flowing like golden water from Lorenzo's body, he was sitting on the bed, fully awake and transformed. His eyes, once a warm brown, now shone with a kaleidoscope of changing colors, as if they contained entire universes. On the walls, the drawings had transformed into living murals, windows to thousands of memories that flowed like rivers of light and color. "Lorenzo," whispered Clara, approaching cautiously, her voice mixing amazement, fear, and a hint of hope. "Is it you?" He smiled, a gesture that contained both the familiarity of the man he had been and the ancient wisdom of what he had become. "It's me, and I'm more. I've found the balance, the anchor point between worlds." Anna approached too, marveling at the moving images that now covered every surface of the room. "My mother." "She's here," Lorenzo replied, touching his own temple with a gentle gesture. "They're all here. But now I can do more than just contain their memories. I can give them new life, allow them to grow and evolve." He extended his hand towards the nearest wall. The murals responded to his gesture as if they were extensions of his own consciousness, transforming into new scenes, new stories woven from the threads of thousands of interwoven memories. "The bridge is built," he announced, his voice laden with the weight of responsibility and the promise of the future. "And this is just the beginning." The guardians, invisible to all except Lorenzo, nodded in recognition and welcome. For the first time in millennia, one of their own had found the way to truly be a bridge between worlds, a guardian of memories who not only preserved, but gave new life and meaning to the stories of the past. But while Clara and Anna celebrated his recovery and transformation, marveling at the spectacle of light and memory surrounding them, Lorenzo felt the weight of his new reality settling on his shoulders. He had achieved the impossible, yes, but the real challenge was just beginning. Being the bridge between worlds, the guardian of countless lives and memories, was a responsibility that would change not only his life, but the very course of human history. Chapter 8: The Eternal Canvas. 6 months had passed since the day Lorenzo became more than just a simple artist. His old studio, located in the heart of Mexico City, had transformed into a sanctuary of living memories. The walls, ceiling, and floor were covered with paintings that constantly changed, like windows to a universe of interwoven memories. Each surface pulsed with an energy that seemed to breathe with its own life, containing stories that moved and evolved in an endless cycle. The place had been declared a special research zone by the Neurological Research Center, and although few truly understood what was happening there, the impact of Lorenzo's works was felt around the world. Scientists, artists, and philosophers flocked en masse to witness what many considered a modern miracle, a tangible bridge between art and science, between past and present. Clara observed Lorenzo working on his new method, fascinated by the fluidity with which he moved between memories, like a conductor guiding a symphony of lives. He no longer needed brushes or conventional canvases. It was enough for him to touch a surface for memories to begin manifesting visually, each emerging with a clarity and detail that defied imagination. "It's fascinating," Clara commented, reviewing her latest notes on a tablet loaded with data. "You've found a way to preserve memories without consuming people's vital essence. It's as if you've created a new language, a new form of communication between souls." Lorenzo nodded, his kaleidoscopic eyes reflecting flashes of ancient and new stories. "It's like a living library," he explained, his voice soft but full of conviction. "Memories are not just stored, they interact, grow, evolve. Each memory is a thread in the fabric of the universe, and my job is to weave those threads into a tapestry that everyone can see and understand." An elderly woman in a wheelchair, accompanied by her family, patiently waited her turn. Since news of his gift had spread, people from all over the world sought his help to preserve the memories of their loved ones affected by Alzheimer's and other degenerative diseases. For many, Lorenzo was their last hope of keeping the most precious fragments of their lives alive. "Are you ready, Mrs. Gonzalez?" Lorenzo asked softly, approaching the elderly woman with a warm and comforting smile. As he touched her hand, the studio walls began to transform. But this time it was different. Instead of absorbing memories, Lorenzo acted as a conductor, allowing stories to flow naturally towards the studio surfaces, where they came to life with a vitality that defied all logic. "Look," whispered one of the family members, pointing to a scene that was forming. A graduation dance in the 50s, youthful laughter, promises of eternal love floating in the air like notes of a forgotten song. Lorenzo had learned to keep his own essence intact while serving as a bridge. The guardians, who now manifested as soft flashes of light in the corners of his vision, had recognized his method as an evolution of their ancient role. He was no longer just a vessel for memories, he was a creator, a weaver of stories that connected past with present and future. "Each preserved memory is a victory against oblivion," Lorenzo explained to Clara as he worked, his hands moving with the grace of a dancer. "But most importantly, they can now be shared. Every person who visits the studio doesn't just see the memories of their loved ones, they experience them, understand them, connect with them in a deeply meaningful way." It was true. People who visited the studio could not only see the memories of their loved ones, they could experience them, understand them, connect with them in a deeply meaningful way. For many, it was like reliving moments they thought lost forever, a second chance to experience the love, joy, and connection that defined their lives. Dr. Montero's surgical technique, preserved in one of the main murals, had already been studied and replicated by neurosurgeons around the world, saving dozens of lives. Rosa Garcia's life stories had become part of an oral history project that inspired new generations, demonstrating that the past was not just a place of nostalgia, but a source of wisdom and learning. "But what is the cost to you?" Clara asked, noticing the exhaustion on his face after each session. She knew that each connection, each shared memory, left its mark on Lorenzo, a reminder of the responsibility he had assumed. Lorenzo smiled, a gesture that contained both wisdom and melancholy. "It's no longer a cost, Clara. It's an exchange. Each memory I help preserve enriches the complete tapestry. I am the guardian, but I am also the canvas where all these stories find a home." The studio walls pulsed gently, as if responding to his words. Thousands of stories, intertwined in an eternal dance of light and color, each preserved, each alive, each part of something greater. It was a reminder that art, in its purest form, was not just an expression of human creativity, but a bridge to the divine, a connection between souls that transcends time and space. True art, Lorenzo concluded, is not about capturing a moment, but keeping it alive. It's not about retaining, but about sharing. And as long as there are stories to tell, memories to preserve, I'll be here, being the bridge between what was and what will be. The guardians, invisible to all but him, nodded in silent approval. Lorenzo had transformed his gift into something new, something that not only preserved the past but built bridges to the future. He had found a balance that no one else had achieved, a way to be the guardian of memories without losing himself in the process. And so, in that studio full of living memories, Lorenzo Velázquez Ruiz continued his eternal work, not as a simple artist, but as the guardian of the infinite canvas where the stories of humanity found their immortal home. Each day brought new stories, new challenges, but also new opportunities to connect, to heal, to remember. Because at the heart of every memory, at the center of every story, was the eternal truth that we are all connected. We are all part of a tapestry larger than ourselves, a tapestry that Lorenzo had sworn to protect and preserve for generations to come.